Good morning, everyone. My name is Jill Rockwell, and I am the Dean of Students here at the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you today to our Constitution Day panel on free elections and the rule of law. Constitution Day was established by the late Senator Byrd in 2004 to promote civic engagement and more specifically a better understanding of the significance of our US Constitution. This day, which is actually commemorated tomorrow on September 17th, marks the anniversary of the signing of the Constitution in 1787. When we were thinking here at the Batten School about how to celebrate this day during a planning session over the summer, we recognized that there could be no better UVA partner than the Karsh Institute for Democracy. And needless to say, we are incredibly grateful that Stephanie Georgakis Abbott and Will Thompson not only quickly agreed to collaborate, but then reached out to a number of other fantastic partners, resulting in what should be a really fascinating conversation today. I'd like to take a moment to thank not only our wonderful Karsh colleagues, but also the Karsh Center for Law and Democracy at the law school, the Virginia Law Foundation and its executive director, Ray White, for sponsoring this event. And finally, the American Bar Association, with a special thanks to Jay Meyerson, who helped conceive of the actual program today. So just a couple technical brief matters. First, we know that because this is a regular class day for many of our students, some of you might have to leave a little early for class. We ask that you just do this as quietly as possible when the time comes. And for all of our guests in attendance, there will be ample pizza waiting for you just outside the doors at the conclusion of the event. And I note that there is plenty of pizza, so there is no need to rush the pizza boxes. So now I know you are as excited as I am to meet our guests, and I am really honored to invite to the podium Michael York, President of the Virginia State Bar. Mr. York has his own legal practice in Reston, Virginia, and among his many, many accolades and really interesting professional experiences, before becoming an attorney, he was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who covered the federal courts for the Washington Post. Mr. York.
Thank you, Dean, and good morning. My name is Michael York, and you guys are in for a treat. You couldn't have picked a better place in the entire campus than right here, right now. I'll get quickly into this. I'm honored to be here, and I'm really honored to introduce Mary Smith, the immediate past president of the American Bar Association and the first Native American woman to serve in that role in the almost 150 years of the ABA. I met Mary before she was president, and I wanted to know more about her, so I asked a couple of friends who were also past presidents of the ABA, Robert Gray in Richmond and Steve Zack in Miami. They both told me basically the same thing. They said she was remarkably intelligent, incredibly curious, and a fireball of energy. They both predicted she would make a great leader of the ABA, and they were right. I last saw Mary in Chicago last year as she was ending her term and preparing to hand over the gavel. I told her that, in my view, I did not remember any, in modern history at least, a more impactful president. Let me tell you why. She's probably best known for, she did a lot of things, but she's best known for establishing the Bipartisan Task Force for American Democracy. Now, if you're like me, you probably never would have thought that democracy would ever be remotely controversial. But wait till you hear from Judge Luttig, who was co-chair of the task force. Throughout Mary's presidency, she told audiences across the country that we are right now in the middle of a storm. And she told the ABA House of Delegates last month in her farewell address that as lawyers, it's our job to ride into the storm. I mean, it gives me chills when I think about that. It would take far too long to list your accomplishments, Mary, but you guys should know that very early in her legal career, she worked in the White House. She rose to associate counsel to the president. She has been the CEO of the Indian Health Service, which is a $6 billion agency responsible for providing federal health services to over 2 million Native Americans and Alaska Natives across the country. You should also know that she's an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation and that she created the Caroline and Ora Smith Foundation to train Native American girls in technology, science, engineering, and math. Please join me in welcoming Mary Smith.
Well, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. I wish I had taped it. It was very, very kind. I am so excited to be here, and it's so fitting that we all are here today to celebrate Constitution Day. For 237 years, America's Constitution has guided our country and defined us as a nation of laws. When democracy is tested, we all draw strength from the Constitution as the bedrock to make our country more equal and more just for all our citizens. American democracy requires constant care, vigilance, and full participation to determine the very future of our nation. Today, we celebrate Constitution Day, and the Constitution begins with the phrase, "We the people," which stands as a powerful reminder that America was founded upon the principle that our government derives its power from its citizens and all their diverse views. As president of the American Bar Association, I highlighted the issue of democracy. It is only by all of us working together to protect our democracy that we will realize the Constitution's promise of a more perfect union. As president, I created the ABA Task Force for American Democracy, and I could not have asked for better co-chairs and members. When I first asked Judge Luttig to be co-chair of the task force, he did not hesitate. He jumped right in, and you are in for a treat today. And today you'll hear from Judge Luttig, who's the co-chair, and Jack Young, who's a member of the advisory committee of the task force. I want to thank the Karsh Institute of Democracy, the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, the American Bar Association, the Karsh Center for Law and Democracy, and the Virginia Law Foundation, and Jay Meyerson for this program, and also Stephanie Gregorius Abbott. Thank you so much. So today, you will hear about the state of democracy, what lawyers and all of us can do, and the work of the Task Force for American Democracy. So let me introduce our esteemed moderator. Ian Solomon is a professor of practice and dean of the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. For 4 years, he served in the U.S. Senate as legislative counsel to a senator I think you might have heard of, Barack Obama. Later, under the Obama administration, he was confirmed unanimously by Congress as the U.S. Executive Director for the World Bank Group. He has also been a consultant with McKinsey, an associate dean and visiting lecturer at Yale Law School, and a vice president and lecturer in law at the University of Chicago, which is my alma mater. And before joining the Batten School, he led his own international consulting practice focused on conflict and collaboration. So with that, I turn over to our moderator. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dean Rockwell. Thank all of you for being here and being part of this celebration. It is an honor to officially welcome you to the Batten School's Constitution Day programming. And as Mary said, in honor of a 237-year anniversary of the signing of the U.S. Constitution on September 7th, 1787. You'll see little gifts we've given you on your seats, your own copy of the Constitution. I hope you'll read it, reread it, whether you are a U.S. citizen or not. It's really short. You can get through it, I promise. And in so many ways, it's the fundamental building block of everything we want to achieve in public policy. It's also the fundamental framework for what we hope you'll consider in terms of public leadership. Read it, reread it, challenge yourself to find something new, something surprising, perhaps something that you thought was in here that's not. Remind yourself what is here and maybe what strikes you as notable in not being here. And take a moment to consider how profound and extraordinary our nation's experiment in self-government really is. So thank you for celebrating Constitution Day with us here at UVA. Today, we're going to discuss the Constitution, democracy, and the rule of law. We'll look at the purpose and power and protection of elections and the right to vote. You may hear things that reassure you. You may hear things that alarm you. I hope you'll be challenged to reaffirm your commitment to active citizenship and leadership to bridge divides in this experiment in self-government. There's also going to be a test, but we'll return to the test part later. We are fortunate to have today two terrific panelists. The first, Judge J. Michael Luttig, is the Karsh Institute of Democracy's inaugural Distinguished Fellow in Law and Democracy and serves as co-chair of the American Bar Association's Task Force for American Democracy. He was appointed by former President George H.W. Bush to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit and served from 1991 to 2006. He also served as Assistant Attorney General for the United States Department of Justice and as a counselor to the United States Attorney General. Judge Luttig was Assistant Counsel to the President at the White House under former President Ronald Reagan. He clerked for then Judge Antonin Scalia when he was a judge on the DC Circuit, and as a law clerk and then special assistant to the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Warren Burger. Judge Luttig earned his bachelor's degree from Washington and Lee University and his law degree from, the University of Virginia. Please join me in welcoming Judge Luttig. We are also fortunate to have Jack Hardin Young, member of the American Bar Association Task Force on American Democracy Advisory Commission. He's an adjunct professor of international and comparative election law at William & Mary School of Law and senior counsel at Sandler Reef in Washington. He's the former chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Election Law and editor and contributor to a number of publications, including International Election Principles, Democracy and the Rule of Law, and International Election Remedies. With this expertise, Mr. Young has served as an advisor to election management bodies in over a dozen countries on electoral justice, election procedures, and electoral dispute resolution. He received law degrees from the University of Virginia and Oxford University as well, and is a life fellow of the American Bar Foundation, a life member of the American Law Institute, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Young. Now, we initially had a third panelist, former Hewlett-Packard CEO and 2016 presidential election candidate, Carly Fiorina, but she had to pull out due to illness today, so we wish her a speedy recovery. And you'll miss some of her humor and energy on this panel, but we're going to do our best. The judge promises me he can make up for everything Carly was going to bring to this panel. So I'm looking forward to having a conversation with the two of you. There will also be time for audience members to submit questions. For those of you here in Garrett Hall, you will see a QR code on one of these screens at some point when it's time to submit your questions. And for those of you who are joining online, there is a Qualtrics link in the video description where you can submit your questions. I don't get to see them, but at some point they'll be read aloud towards the end of the program. So I mentioned a test that we would have you all take today. They're the judges, they don't have to actually take the test. But it's a civics test that is administered by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to people wishing to become naturalized citizens of the United States. You can find it online. There are 100 possible questions. Each applicant for citizenship is asked 10 questions and must answer 6 correctly to pass. The first question we can take together, got a little hint from Mary Smith earlier. Here's the question. The idea of self-government is in the first 3 words of the Constitution. What are these words?
We the people.
I think they're off to a good start. But actually, if you turn to page 1 and the preamble here, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We're asking a lot of this Constitution: union, justice, tranquility, defense, general welfare, and liberty. And that's in addition to all the work we've been doing defining who is included in we the people. Gets to Mary's point about care, vigilance, and participation to make the Constitution real to try to achieve those. Here's another question from the civic test. It's number 12 on the list of 100 they have. What is the rule of law? Think about that for a minute. There's no place you can turn to read a definition. Now, I will read you the acceptable answers according to the citizenship test, what they will give credit for. First, everyone must follow the law. Second, leaders must obey the law. Third, government must obey the law. And four, no one is above the law. Let me use that as a starting point for our panelists today, and I invite you now to turn on your microphones. And I'll start with you, Judge. You've been a staunch defender of the rule of law and a critic of efforts to weaken the rule of law. In a recent statement, you said, "America's democracy and rule of law are the defining features of our nation. It is America's democracy, Constitution, and rule of law that have made America the envy of the world and the beacon of democracy and freedom for the world for almost 250 years. How would you define or characterize the rule of law in America today?"
Well, first, thank you, Dean, and thank you, the Batten School, and of course, the University of Virginia and the University of Virginia Law School. Thank you also the Karsh Institute and the American Bar Association, and especially Mary Smith, who convened what has to be the most significant task force or committee or subcommittee ever in American history. Mary Smith rose to the moment, and she's urged all of us to rise to the moment too. But thank you, Mary. As the dean said, the American democracy and the rule of law are the fundamental tenets of America and American society. They are the fundamental tenets of the Constitution of the United States. And they are, as I said, they have been for 237 years, the beacon of freedom and democracy for the world. It is they that have made America the envy of the world. But for the first time in those 237 years since our founding, both American democracy and the rule of law are in grave peril for reasons that we all know. A footnote to that observation, an important one today, as we are celebrating Constitution Day, and that is this. In 1838, when he was still a young man, Abraham Lincoln gave what many consider his most important speech during his entire lifetime. And that was a speech before the Men's Lyceum in Springfield, Illinois. And in that speech, he talked eloquently and powerfully about the need for the rule of law, the need for the Constitution of the United States, and actually called for a revival to the Constitution and rule of law, lest America's institutions of law and democracy perish. Interestingly, you should know, that was a time of political violence in America, just as today is a time of political violence in America. We too need, arguably more than the American people did in that day, a revival to the Constitution and to the rule of law. That's how fundamental the rule of law is to America and American society. But today, I believe we are living through, hopefully living through, the greatest threat to American democracy and the rule of law in all of our history. The dean said, of course, that we all play a part in American democracy. Now more than ever, every single one of us, every single one of you in this room, every single one of we, the people of the United States of America, we must rise, affirm our belief in the Constitution and the rule of law, and defend and support the Constitution and the rule of law, or we're going to wake up tomorrow and we're not going to have either.
Thank you, Judge. Jack, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you, and thank you for the honor of being here at the University of Virginia. I think the answer to the rule of law is more about the sense of self-government by the people. It is not a terribly complex concept, and it is really the faith in the people, the we the people. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to Richard Price in January of 1789, said, well, excuse me, we're at the grounds, says, whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government, that whatever gets so far wrong as to attract their notice, they will be relied upon to set them to rights. And the question today really is our current state of democracy consistent with Thomas Jefferson's belief? And I contend that what Jefferson was talking about is at risk today. We have a failure of general belief in our democracy, led in large part by polarization and the dividing of the country, not by the people, not by we the people, but by politicians, and let's be candid, by one particular politician who decides that it is to his advantage to try to put us at odds, playing on individuals' anxieties about their own existence. But what we do know is that manipulation of we the people must be transitory. Because if it becomes a permanent feature of our America, then we lose not only the sense of general government and of the rule of law, but we lose a sense of where we are going, and we are open then to the most base manipulation. And I think that we need to confront head on the challenge to democracy and recognize, as the judge does, in fact, while he was on the Court of Appeals, I think he was one of our brightest members of the judiciary covering this very Commonwealth. Please don't repeat that outside this room, Judge. But we have to come up to the challenge. And the challenge is not only the mistruths. I mean, we can all laugh and think it's just bizarre that someone would talk about what certain people eat for breakfast and dinner, knowing full well that the pets, the dogs and cats of Springfield, Ohio, are safe. And yet we have attempts by a candidate and partially a political party following that candidate that wants to challenge not only our sense of we the people, but wants to challenge our common sense as to what is right and wrong. We can talk, and we will talk a lot about solutions and causes, but when it comes down to it, this is our moments of profiles and courage. It is time that we the people, stand up, because for whatever reason, our elected politicians are not willing to stand up to the most anti-American, anti-democratic messages that we are hearing from both candidates from time to time. But let's not forget that when the then current president denied that he had lost, that there was a gubernatorial candidate in Georgia of the opposite political party that said almost the same things. That in I wish it was 1970 and I was here. In the 20, I am old, but not that old. You're going to start looking at me saying, and when Biden was your student, what did you say, Jack? In 2016, who was it that called half of America despicables? It was, in fact, a member of someone from a political party different from the one that is causing some of the disrespect today. So this is a problem of politics, just exasperated to the 100th degree by a particular candidate.
So Jack, if I can interrupt for a second, we've had severe partisanship, we've had name calling, we've had horrible things. We've been a divided nation for 237 years. Even just getting to that constitutional convention was a miracle of uniting people. But there may be a special threat with regard to elections that we are facing right now.
Well, just go back to Tom's life running against the Northerners. When he and Johnny Adams get into two major elections for presidency, one that the Northerner won, the second that Thomas Jefferson won. And you look at the exchanges, you look at the difference between the political newspapers of the time, and I think you will find the most scurrilous comments forever. When we've seen it elsewhere, we saw it in the Andrew Jackson election against his wife, Rachel. We even saw it in Grover Cleveland. Mama, where's my papa? Given that Cleveland had in fact an illegitimate son. So we've seen it. But what we haven't seen is the fact that what is now happening is the challenges are to the system. Between Adams and Jefferson and Jackson, Cleveland, and it goes on, those were campaign challenges. And yes, we see a lot of silliness, small hands and comments, but we also see now attacks on our very democracy, which you didn't see in the, for example, 1800 election between Jefferson and Adams. And one of the problems is we are, in a sense, in a political world that is outside the bounds. It's a little like, think about this. The university, and I'll pick an arbitrary school. Let's assume it's a technical school down the road. We can win that game if we stay within the bounds. The field is 40 yards wide, 100 yards long, and things can happen in it. But what happens if our opponent starts playing from the stands or in the parking lot or outside of what we believe is the field of play? That's what's happening today with this campaign, particularly, without mentioning name, the candidate who has been in the race the longest, and is not a female. And it doesn't have a great lieutenant governor.
So speaking of playing outside of bounds, Judge Luttig, you've said that a stake was driven through the heart of American democracy on January 6th, 2021. I know that date plays a large role in your thinking about the grave peril you mentioned. But sometimes it's dismissed as no big deal or something blown out of proportion for political purposes. Why is January 6th a big deal in your thinking?
I'll answer that, but I first want to make the point for everyone here at Thomas Jefferson University and in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which of course is the home of many of our founding fathers, that our founding fathers and the framers of our Constitution feared more than anything else when they were creating this nation, this moment, and our demagoguery political environment today. They spoke more about this moment and these politicians than they did anything else in the forming of our nation. And they believed that if this moment ever came, that it would be the end of America that they had created. Go through the Federalist Papers, and I could cite you, letters from the founding fathers exchanged about a demagogue and demagoguery that would sweep the American people away, that would play on the prejudices and the biases and the fears of the American people and carry them away and make that demagogue or demagogues their leaders. And that would be the end and ruin of America. Those were our founding fathers. Those are the people who created this country. Those are the people who wrote our Constitution, the fundamental tenets of which are Americans' democracy and the rule of law. But January 6th, for the past 4 years, I've tried to tell the American people that January 6th is not politics. What occurred on January 6th was not political. On that day, the former president committed literally the gravest crimes against the United States of America possible under our Constitution, with the possible, but only possible, exception of treason. And of course, he's being prosecuted to this day for those grave crimes. So we had a wonderful dinner last night, and we were just talking, and I said what I've said for 3 years publicly, which is January 6th is a singular event, unlike any other event in American history to date, where a sitting president of the United States tried to overturn an election that he had lost by a vote and the will of the American people. So when we talk about democracy and we the people, this is what we're talking about. This is what all of you young people here today have to understand. Most fundamentally, democracy can be, all things to all people if you want, but there's only one definition of democracy, and that is a form of government that we have here in the United States of America, by which we, the people, every one of you in this room, always hold all the power of the United States of America. And then, quadrennially or whatever, you, the American people, you confer temporarily your power on your elected representatives for the sole and only purpose of representing your interests and the nation's interests. And so what I've said, in fact, I said first in my congressional testimony before the January 6th committee, is where do we start to heal? We divest those representatives of our power that we have loaned to them. We divest those officials of our power who have betrayed us. And then we confer our power again on people who understand that it is our power that they wield in Washington, D.C. It is not their power, and it is never to be wielded for their own self-interest or their own partisan interests. So that's what this is all about. It's about us. It's not about them up the road. And to say that all of our officials in Washington have lost sight of that fact is an understatement. As I said to Congress, I said, our politicians today never believe that they have to choose between country and party or country and self, when every single day they are required and obligated to choose between country and party and self, and they refuse to do so. So to your specific question, Dean, I said before, long before the former president was prosecuted by the Department of Justice and Jack Smith in particular, I said it is essential for the rule of law that the former president be prosecuted for his grave offenses. Now, all of us in the law and all of you who are not in the law and will never be in the law understand that because of our jury system, we can never predict how a jury will decide a case. But we can always predict whether a person who commits a grave crime against the United States of America will be prosecuted, for that crime. But as we sit here today, as you all know, we don't know whether the former president will ever be tried for the offenses that he committed against the United States of America. That's a failure of the rule of law and of the courts of the United States that we do not know that today and that he may never be.
I think that's all well and good, Your Honor, except it misses the main point. And the main point, I think, is that what we have lost is a sense among the man and the woman on the bus as to what this is all about. It's great to talk about the rule of law, and you're right, almost as always. But American democracy is decided by we, the people. And one of the things we don't do a good job at is actually helping, teaching the man and woman on the bus what democracy means. And interestingly, demagoguery and democracy are pretty close together. And we see, across the world, we see that demagoguery, whether it is 1930s Germany or modern day Hungary or a dozen other places where demagogues have taken over. Here in America, we have an opportunity, but it is unfortunately really not talking to you all who go to the finest university in the world. It is, what is the groundskeeper thinking? What is the man and the woman who take a bus to come to this university? What are they thinking? And how do we teach them what the Constitution is about in terms that they understand? That, I think, is the real challenge.
And do you have an answer for that? Do you have suggestions for that?
I actually do. And it is that we have to get back to civics. We have to get back to building a common understanding of our common heritage. And yes, law schools do a great job. Universities do a great job. But most of America doesn't live on the grounds. It lives in their own worlds. And their own worlds need our help in giving them the skills to realize what it means to be we the people. And I believe that one of the things we can do as a takeaway from here is start thinking about the greater community. What is this sense of democracy? What does it mean? And how do we make the rule of law understandable? If I ask my neighbors, what's the rule of law? They will say, it means, Jack, I got to stop at the stop sign. They don't think that it means much to do with who we elect or what we think. And democracy only works when intelligent people think about intelligent things. And
Well,
that
Jack, if that's all well and good.
Oh, I know
If you
wouldn't
remember
understand
only
it.
one thing I say today, this is not the fault of the American people, okay? Every single bit of this is the fault of our so-called leaders in America. It's not your job to understand this. It's their job to understand it. It's their job not to betray us.
And when they do, who has to answer for it?
They have to answer for it. I gave the answer for us, the American people. Throw them out and prosecute them if we need to.
There, you and I totally agree.
I thought we
But
would.
what tools do we give them to throw them out?
The Constitution of the United States has given them the tools.
It gives
It's
them
the
the theory.
vote. It's
It
the
doesn't give them a
vote.
tool.
It's the vote, Jack. That's what the Constitution Day this year is all about. This is your opportunity, the American people, to vote your conscience, which is the conscience of America and the conscience of the Constitution of the United States. It's pretty darn simple.
It's pretty simple, but we actually came pretty close. If I read things you've written, Judge, January 6, 2021, to actually not having votes counted the way with the will of the people. And, you were responsible for a Twitter thread that might have actually been instrumental in ensuring that the votes would be counted properly. Can you talk to us about your famous set of tweets?
Well, yes, just to say at this point that I didn't even know what Twitter was when I tweeted that tweet or twit or whatever you called it. But yes, but from that moment until this moment, I have talked about the utter failure of leadership in America. Indeed, the cowardice, the moral cowardice, and obviously the political cowardice of the so-called leaders in this country today. So, whatever else, I'm consistent.
But Judge,
The problem is also consistent, or have we solved the vulnerabilities that we faced 3 years ago?
No, I'll let Jack take that.
Well, and that's where I come back to Thomas Jefferson's premise to Richard Price, and that is that the people will, in fact, over time, can be relied upon to right the wrongs and protect their rights. And you're absolutely right that the leadership has failed us both constitutionally and rule of law. But remember, this Constitution didn't start out with a whole lot of people having the right to vote. The right to vote has evolved from the people through movements like suffrage, like the civil rights movement, like what we are going through now in reverse. And yes, the leaders have let us down, but the cure is the people. And that means the people being involved and simply not putting up with the nonsense, the lies, the deceit, the name calling, the threats. and even saying that a person hates Taylor Swift. It is the remedy is exactly what Thomas Jefferson said. The people have to right the ship, and the question really is, will they? Can they? And I believe they can, because we do live in a constitutional system.
So I like to be the optimist. And yet, one of the tenets I grew up believing was that part of the rule of law was that no person was above the law. But the Supreme Court seems to have taken a different view with regard to presidential immunity. And I'm troubled by what this might mean for the rule of law in this country. Judge?
You should be troubled. Where even to start? No longer can it be said in America that no man is above the law, because the Supreme Court of the United States held under the Constitution of the United States, first, that Donald Trump is above the law. Of course, the Supreme Court bent over backwards to tell us, well, this wasn't about Donald Trump. This is about the presidency. No. The Supreme Court, for 237 years, has only decided the narrowest issue presented to the court for decision, until Trump versus United States of America, where the Supreme Court decided all issues of presidential power for all time. As Justice Gorsuch said, we're deciding this for all the ages. And that's what they did. And they held that Donald Trump is immune from prosecution for any crime committed against the United States of America. Now listen to this, because it's so counterintuitive. And by the way, it's worse than counterintuitive constitutionally. They said, provided that he committed that crime in the course of executing his official duties and responsibilities as President of the United States of America. Counterintuitive, right? I can see you're perplexed. So is every other person who has ever studied the Constitution and presidential powers. Before that decision, and one of the greatest honors of my life was to head the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice many years ago. And that office is by statute tasked with defending the presidency, the office of the presidency. So I know that of which I speak. Not one person in 237 years since the founding of this country, not one constitutional scholar, not one constitutional professor, not one federal judge, not one Supreme Court justice, no one, please hear me, no person had ever even suggested that a president would be immune from any crime at all, let alone all crimes. The Supreme Court of the United States made this up out of whole cloth, as they say. There is not 1 ounce of support in the Constitution or the laws of the United States, not 1 ounce of support in the founding documents and the founding debates of our country and our Constitution that supported that holding. And it's for that reason that the day after it was decided, I compared the decision to the most ignominious decisions ever decided by the Supreme Court of the United States, such as Plessy against Ferguson, Dred Scott, and Korematsu. And a day later, I said, in a more academic context, I said, it's actually worse than all those cases because of the structural violence to the Constitution that if that opinion did, they will rue the day that they ever decided that. And they decided it in the context of Donald Trump, who had been prosecuted by the United States of America for the gravest crimes against the Constitution. It's reprehensible.
Well, maybe one suggestion, and I heard this from a wise man, maybe what we need to do, Dean, is to send 9 of these booklets with the Constitution and Declaration to a court building in Washington, D.C.
We're going to go to Q&A. We have, I think, Jenny in the back has been collecting these people who submitted their questions, and we'll read questions. I understand there may be some students darting out and out of class, but Jenny.
I guess things have changed. I see people are actually going to class.
Well, you know, the Batten School.
Yeah. Well,
Jenny, please.
Okay. Our first question is for Judge Luttig. I appreciate your description of the January 6 attacks as being beyond politics, but your recent endorsement of Kamala Harris is obviously very political. As a prominent Republican-appointed judge, was it a difficult decision to do this? And have you faced repercussions that have caused you to question this decision?
Yeah, thank you. It was the very opposite of political. It's the most important statement about the Constitution, the rule of law, and American democracy that I will ever make in my life. And maybe the person who asked that question should take a minute to read the 5.5-page single-space typed letter of endorsement that I wrote and reframe the question. I had the endorsement announced on CNN. CNN asked me, is there anything else you'd like to say to the American people about this letter of endorsement? I said, yes, there is. And I said, you can quote me. I said, from the beginning, we're taught right from wrong. We are not taught right from left. And I said, in my faith, I believe that I would have to answer for my silence if I stood silent on that endorsement. There's no politics at all. And by the way, there's not a single word, even arguably political, in those 5.5 typed pages. And my conclusion was, regrettably, there is only one political party in America today and only one candidate for the presidency who can claim the mantle of protector and defender of America's democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law. And for that reason, I will vote for the Vice President of the United States. Thank you for your question.
Our next question is, you've talked about the Constitution, the people, and elections, but the Constitution doesn't provide for the people to elect the president, only the Congress. Do you see this as good or problematic or changeable? Either way, there's a real possibility that the people will select one president and the electors a different president.
You know, the Constitution doesn't provide for Congress to elect the president. In exceedingly rare circumstances, the Constitution permits the joint session of Congress by vote to award the presidency to a particular person, okay? What the question does raise, though, is the question of the Electoral College, what's known as the Electoral College in America. That's basically, it's not technically constitutional, but it would take a constitutional change to change that system to a system whereby the president is elected by the popular vote of the people. Now, you know, one of my pet peeves my whole life about politicians is that, you know, at any given moment, it only depends on whose ox is being gored, right? You can take that to the bank about politicians. It just happens to be the case right now that the Electoral College votes are more predictably, you know, cast in favor of the Republican candidate. But, you know, that could change almost overnight. But to the main question, many people in America for many years have argued for changing out the Electoral College. That is a major change in American society. My hunch is you'll never have the political will to do that, but I would be all for it if it were possible.
Our next question is, it seems as though the nature of politics and elections is tied to, in some part, a personal incentive that is re-election, retaining power, or pursuing their own agenda. Now, this is a pessimistic view on how elections can play out on an individual level. How do we encourage politicians to reorient themselves to selflessly defending and adhering to the rule of law? Does this require a national cultural shift?
Huh. The order of magnitude of which we've never seen in our history, I would say. I'll just give you my answer, flip answer. There's not a chance in this world ever. And I'll turn it over to the optimist to my left to answer your question. He believes, by the way, that it can happen.
Yeah. The answer is no, yes, and maybe. You know, we tried a few years back to implement on the congressional level term limits. The Supreme Court found that unconstitutional. It seems today that we have two types of politicians. we have those that'll do anything and say anything to stay in office. And I won't be embarrassed to say that a good example is the senior senator from South Carolina, who has said great things about our democracy, consistent with what the judge said at the time of January 6th. And today takes a position 180 degrees differently. Self-interest has always been the problem of American democracy. And it's one of the things that the founding fathers struggled with. And it is the one thing that only the ballot box can change. Even Mr. Jefferson, when he got into office, lost some of his Republican, Democratic, conservative views and became one of our greatest spenders and expanders of rights, probably without the authority of the Constitution. Only if we, throw the bastards out when we believe they are not representing us, will this system work. And yes, as to the Electoral College, it was a compromise at the time of the Constitution. It was a compromise between direct election and very limited electoral powers. It was a bad idea probably then. It's a bad idea today. And it needs to be changed. And will it be changed in our lifetime is the challenge. It may well be that it requires an amendment under Article 5 and that the national political popular vote compact won't pass muster. And I doubt would pass muster with this Supreme Court.
Let me just add one small wrinkle of slight disagreement, just because it's Constitution Day. The founding fathers didn't struggle with partisan politics or political parties at all.
Right.
They feared that political parties would be the demise of America. And that's exactly why they didn't provide for political parties. The founding fathers would be horrified today at our political culture. Horrified.
On that, Your Honor, we totally agree.
So one of the things about the Constitution that I think is so compelling is the pragmatic nature. It didn't assume that people were angels who would all always pursue the public good. It recognized that there were sectional interest and factional interest, and that people were going to pursue their self-interest, but put in enough checks and balances so that those different factions would not end up tearing the country apart. That was the goal. And it also created room for people who did want to speak to something grander and more hopeful and bigger than their self-interest, but speak for the country. And exercise courage when it was uncomfortable. And Judge Luttig, you have a great statement that I've seen when people talk to you about your first tweet, your famous tweet, subjecting you to lots of criticism. And you talked about the decision to do that was actually made months before. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that? As this will probably be, then I'll give you a final word, Jack, after we hear this story from the judge.
Yeah, yes, thank you. But first off, since this is the last question, I do want to make this point. I was recently asked publicly, had the Constitution actually endured? And I said emphatically, yes. The Constitution is resilient enough to endure forever. But for the past 4 or 5 years, it's those persons who are responsible for our Constitution who failed us. So then to your question, so the day before, the night before my testimony, the New York Times asked me to write something about Vice President Pence and the courage that he showed on January 6th. And I wrote that, what was to be an essay in the New York Times, the morning of my testimony. But the New York Times, and I don't mean this, I'm just going to state as a fact, and it didn't bother me in the slightest. They wanted me to say something more specific that had never been said about January 6th and the vice president, and I was unwilling to do that. So when they told me that they would not run the essay that the morning of my testimony, I quickly put together an essay on heroism. And then as soon as I got away from the Capitol, I called a friend at Politico and I said, Ryan, I said, these are the most important words that I expect ever to write. I would appreciate if Politico ran these words in full. And Ryan Lizza at Politico Playbook said, absolutely, Judge, we will run it immediately. And they did. And for purposes today, what I said was, there comes a time in every person's life, public or private, today emphasis on private, personal lives, every one of our lives, where you are summoned and you are called upon to stand and affirm what you believe and what you do not believe. And when you do that in your personal lives, I said, you are a hero. First, to yourself, and then to your family, then to your friends, and to your community, and then to your nation. And then in explanation of that, to the dean's question, good question, I said, heroes, by which I meant all of you in this room, not in the room in Washington, in this room. You make your decision as to what you will do years before the time for decision arrives, such that when that moment arrives, there is no decision to be made. You stand up and affirm what you believe and what you do not believe, and most importantly, you do what's right, and you do not do what you know is wrong. I hope and believe that those are the most important words that I'll leave this world with.
You know, America has been through a lot under this Constitution. Not only its own growth, the war between the states, two world wars, civil rights movement. I actually believe, and I see a future where January 6th and that type of activity is an aberration. And with the grace of God and civic involvement, the January 6th and where we are today will be sent to the dustbin of history. And I have a faith in America that we will get through this, but it's going to be scary. And yes, democracy will be at risk. But I think America is strong enough. If American citizens and voters decide they've had enough. And I believe that's where we are. And I hope and I believe that everything you have said, Judge Luttig, is correct, and that we will come through this. And that the other side will be a stronger democracy, because the alternative is simply unacceptable.
Thank you for spending Constitution Day with us. Please join me in thanking the leadership of Judge Luttig and Batten.